technical difficulty happened right out of the gate. Welcome to the streaming media, or I can't even say that, can I? The SMAdvancedForum monthly video. What do we call this? A podcast? Is it a
hangout? Let's call it a hangout, but without
referencing it. I am Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor of Streaming Media Magazine and StreamingMedia.com, and we are calling this the SMAdvancedForum monthly video hangout, where this is not an official streaming media sanctioned event, but it certainly grew out of streaming media. Dom Robinson, who's one of our contributing editors, will tell you a little bit more about the history if you're not familiar, but this we really just envision as a place for people in the industry, people who are interested in online video, especially if they're interested in the technology, to gather for an hour once a month. Maybe it'll go longer in the future, who knows, and talk to myself, Dom Robinson, who I mentioned, Tim Siglin, who is also a contributing editor of Streaming Media Magazine and StreamingMedia.com, Mark East, who I like to refer to as a streaming veteran man about town, and each episode will also have a guest or two, and today our guest is Konstantin Wilms, who will introduce himself in just a moment. So I just want to say welcome, and thanks for joining us on our inaugural episode. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dom Robinson. Dom.
Hey guys, how are we all? Well, we're here. We made it. This is actually quietly. We've been running a few sort of pre-release versions of this, but this is episode 1 of the real ones and episode 4 of the actual ones we've done. So there's a few in the archives to listen to. But welcome to Streaming Media Advanced Forum, or SMAdvancedForum. So many of you who are tuning in will probably have once upon a time been members of the original Streaming Media Advanced Forum list server, email list server that was run at the back of the Streaming Media properties for many years, and was the raging bull, the crazy cafe, and the battleground for many of our more interesting debates, especially in the era of what was out there, Windows Media and Real Media, and people sharing bits of code and people beating each other up over DRM issues. Well, we decided to bring the band back together. And judging by some of the reaction on LinkedIn, there's a bit of enthusiasm for something a bit more informal. So in my true style, I shall probably start wearing a suit on these shows just to buck the trend. But we are here with, actually this week, one of our guests is Kon, who has, I've dug him out of his grave. He was lying there quietly meditating, feeling happy that the Advanced Forum had been killed off and he'd been left in peace and quiet to rise up and become one of the stars of the streaming industry as it's matured into the real world. I'll leave him to introduce himself. Kon, tell us a little bit about yourself and why we've got you on.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, thanks, guys. Hopefully my picture is coming through and you can hear me correctly. Yeah, so probably just a little bit about myself. Like, I think the list started, was it in 98, 99, somewhere around that time frame. I know we had a couple like permutations of it. So I've been in the industry from, I think, around 91 or 92, where we had a couple of Amigas and SGIs, and we're doing rendering in South Africa, actually. That was pretty interesting. And then I got an offer to go to Malaysia to work on Astro. So we had a team of about 10 or 12 engineering people, and we basically built that from the ground up. So that was sort of my introduction to everything broadcast. You know, those 16-hour days, all times of the
oh yes,
yeah, you know how it goes for like years in a row. But that was really good. And then after that, I went to NDS in the US. So we had a test site, and we actually shipped a lot of the stuff. We staged it in Torrance, and then we shipped it out to Astro in Malaysia. Yeah, that was pretty.
Oh, we got a feedback loop.
It's more.
Anyway, there we go.
Okay. So yeah, so we staged and shipped a lot of pretty much all the hardware, and during that time I focused mostly on data casting. So when I went to News Corp, at least NDS, I worked on the same type of technology, encryption for data casting, the whole ATSC the effort around that to bring data casting to people, etc. And then after that, a couple of startups that I went to. So streaming media hosting, all digital, a couple others as well. And I'm currently at Amazon Web Services. So mostly, pretty much everything I'm doing right now is focused around media. But I'll prefix that or postfix that and say, like, these are my own opinions, not of my employer. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Cool. And Tim?
Actually, let's hand off to Mark real quick, and then Mark
Okay.
can hand back to me since we were able to get Mark in here.
Yay,
Yeah,
Mark.
I'm not. Hey, Dom, how you doing? I'm not sure how good the Wi-Fi is. I'm in a hotel room right now, so apologies if I'm not coming in clearly. But I'm Mark East. I run 090 Media. We offer a full range of live streaming, backhaul, and production services for a number of Fortune 500 customers, and I'm happy to be here.
And Mark's been great in providing sort of the boots on the ground perspective in a few of the test runs that we've done. I'm Tim Siglin, Media Strategy Principal at RealSolver, and as Eric said, a contributing editor. Very glad to have everybody here. We are spread across the country, spread across the country and Europe. So we have Eric in Central Time, who never gets his time actually listed in things when we listed as noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Kon and Mark are both on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Mark, are you traveling to the East Coast now, or are you still out in Pacific this week?
No, I'm actually in Vegas today, so
right.
I'll be heading back west tomorrow, but in Las Vegas as we speak.
Fantastic. Dom, of course, is in the UK, and I'm on the East Coast this week in the Carolinas. So
I'm glad you corrected the Europe statement there. I don't know if I'm in Europe or not at the moment, but I used to be.
My CEO pointed out to me just a minute ago as we'd listed on SMAth that it was a 1 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, when in fact it's 12:08 p.m.
Ah, okay.
We'll train the Brits on how to properly put times in.
I wanted to actually, I'm going to intercede there. I was going to bring this up much later on, but it made me wish that somebody had developed maybe this is suitable for the HTML6 release if the W3C stays together and gets that far. I think that we should come up with a global variable for every type of web browser and platform, something like $local time, where you can then put in your personal local time and it just translates that to everyone's right local time. So I can just put my live gig is at $local time 5 p.m. and it'll just sort out all the localization for me. That would be, I think, a superlative thing for live events on global streaming platforms.
So, which makes a lot of sense. If you do that in a calendar, say in iOS on an Apple device, if you tell it the time zone, then it will correct it for you as you move back and forth across time zones. But it assumes that you don't want it; you want local time. So
yeah, I think we need to get it baked into the ASCII set or something, you know.
Okay, so in the meantime, since the last one we did, where Dom and Steve were sitting very, very nicely at IBC with wine and enjoying it, Eric was on the run from airport to airport. Mark was on. Yeah, right. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, Dom.
Yeah, it's always 5 o'clock somewhere.
So at that point, you all were just getting ready to go to IBC, and I know Eric and Dom went. I don't think Kon, did you go to IBC this year?
No, I didn't. But we had a whole bunch of things that we prepared and put together for that. So there was still a lot of interesting stuff being done there.
Okay, let me come back around to you in just a minute. I know Mark didn't go and I didn't go this year. So Eric and Dom, what did you see on the show floor that was of interest? What did you see in the after parties? Obviously, the company that we cannot name, Streaming Media, has a really nice canal cruise. Who did you meet interesting on the canal cruise? And I'll let either one of you pick up and run with this one.
Well, to be honest, on our canal cruise, I spent most of my time talking about Bruce Springsteen.
That's very unlike you, Eric.
It was not, but that's that's in part what these canal cruises and all the other after parties and such are for. Yeah, of course they're for networking, but they're also for getting to know these people you work with through email and phone calls on a regular basis, and just getting to know them a little bit better as people. And so we did a lot of that. As far as IBC itself, maybe I'm jaded, but I walked away feeling like it was. I didn't walk away with any one or even two or three big takeaways. I was joking with someone last week. I was at an event called the Nordic TV Summit in Copenhagen. That by the end of IBC, if I had $1 or €1 for every time someone mentioned end-to-end solution, I'd be a very rich man. But it's always a question of from which end to which end, right? But that seemed to be the theme that I kept coming back to. And kept hearing was
the new workflow or the new pipeline. I mean, are they
exactly? Well, they're end-to-end workflows, Tim. They're end-to-end pipelines. So as always, there's some interesting stuff. I mean, I saw some interesting VR and 360 applications that don't necessarily apply to the type of streaming video most of us work with. There was a company whose name I can't believe I forgot, but who had built an igloo-shaped container or building, and someone could crawl into that igloo, and between the dome over your head and the floor beneath, get a complete 360 view of the video. And they were using that to, for instance, train people who were going to work on oil rigs. Oil being one industry where having a device like that, investing in creating a 360 video is probably cheaper than sending someone out and training them on the actual oil rig. So that was cool, but it wasn't exactly anything in the mainstream. So that's kind of my jaded take on it.
It's funny that you say that, because I remember growing up as a kid going to Space Mountain, and they projected on the floor, and then I went to Carowinds, which is here in the Carolinas, and they did these sort of hemispherical things that you sat on the floor and you saw most of it around you. So essentially, it's just maybe we're able to do that in a more portable sense, or as you say, a training setting, but that's not really new. That's just miniaturization continuing on.
Sure, that makes sense.
What about 6K streaming or 8K streaming?
Yeah, I mean, Sony introduced an 8K camera. There was talk of 8K streaming here and there on the floor, but that also is an area where it seems like there's a bit of fatigue setting in. We've gone so quickly from HD to 4K, and now talking about 8K. Are there applications and needs for it? Of course. I believe that I forget the broadcaster in Japan, but they've mandated that. NHK, thank you. I always get them mixed up with NRK, which is in Norway. But NHK has mandated that there be 8K production. That's certainly valuable on the capture and production side of things. What does it translate into for the average video viewer? Not much.
Sure. Dom, what did you say?
So I had a strange IBC. I saw a canal at one point, which was a bit unfortunate, but we probably should only talk about that at the end of the session. And other than that,
you were all wet at one point. We don't. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a different story for perhaps a real world SMAF. But on the innovations front, I didn't really have a lot of time to walk the halls this year. I was pretty back to back with meetings. It was a bit of a shame actually, because I had a press pass, and had I not had so many day job things to do, there were quite a few sessions I wanted to go and see. I didn't see a lot of innovation, but I'm not really looking in that space at the moment very much. What I did see was a lot of trend, a lot of change in positioning in major traditional broadcasters. And actually, I sort of half penned a blog post on it. There was now a respect for streaming, no longer like the bastard child, but more like the distant cousin in the broadcast industry, and I felt that was very positive. The carriers are all talking seriously about it. The guys who've got in and got a bit too far, Cisco's and Ericsson in the world, are sitting on their hands a bit, trying to work out exactly what they were doing. But there was just movement at what I thought was quite a big level, where people were ultimately they were all paying deep attention to GAFAN, and it almost felt actually, the size of the Google stand alone was, I thought, quite a statement. That was new. Its location was impressive. Apple took a bunch of us out to a sort of sideshow they did in their facilities in Leidseplein, which was quite interesting, talking about their new workflows in the back of their video production tool. And I'm getting Final Cut. That's it. Looking at their compressor outputs and so on. So yeah, I thought those guys were doing some interesting stuff, and it was more the weight and interest of their presence in the space. In terms of gizmos and trickery, VR, I'm not yet captured by VR at all. It hasn't, as a streaming problem, it's just a more bandwidth issue from my point of view. It hasn't really excited me yet, but
so one of the things you mentioned, Dom, and before I go on to Con, I just want to come back to this. You said last time that you wanted to go see whether OMPs were commoditized.
VPs, yeah.
OVPs, sorry, online media platforms, media platforms. Did you get a chance to sort of get a sense of the trend on that?
There didn't seem to be any new entrants, which I was actually kind of expecting more new entrants. But Brightcove, Yara, the sort of big mainstream players look pretty confident. Their stands look busy. What the guys we went to see were busy, clearly tired by the day three from back to back. So yeah, I thought there was a lot of business going on, actually. I just don't think there was a lot of, ooh, look at this new shiny toy this year. There was a really pathetic demonstration in the futures zone where they had what's that old Victorian experiment where they shine stuff on a thin screen that's suspended in front of a stage. Fourier's Ghost or something. There's a name for it anyway. And basically they had somebody's tights stretched across a screen, and they were projecting some sharks on it, and they had a screen at the back with some water, and they're going, look, doesn't it look like it's 3D? And I was just like, no, it doesn't at all. So sorry to be damning to the people who've just spent their years doing that, but it didn't impress me.
But Don, don't you think that, I mean, that's the flip side, right? Is that if real business is getting done at the expense of new shiny buttons on everybody's stand, that's a good thing for the industry, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think
So
I think this year's been quite pivotal for that.
What about HEVC? Because obviously, Apple did their announcements fairly either just before or just after IBC, and HEVC really had come up to the forefront on that. Was there a lot of talk about HEVC, or was it still AVC at this point for the broadcast world?
There was a lot of demonstration on the Intel stand of different people using the media SDKs to do different codec implementations running hardware HEVC on the Intel Xenon E3s in particular. And the one that was pretty much the runaway talk of the show was Beamer, to give them some kudos. Beamer's the codec to watch at the moment. Intel's clearly thinks that it's a better implementation on their hardware than their own codec. And is pushing them pretty hard at the moment. We're in the process of getting our hands on it. I'm quite excited about it. People are talking about it, and it's nice to have a new codec. I think that's very Streaming Media Advanced Forum, actually, to have a good codec war.
Well, if we're going to talk about codecs, the other thing I did see at the event was, I believe it was Bitmovin had a very compelling AV1 demonstration as well. They've really worked on their AV1 implementation, and so I do think we've gone from one codec war to the next.
And as we know, those of us who've been in the industry, like what Con said, being back in 91, 92 with the non-linear editing systems, we've had format wars every 6 to 7 years. So it doesn't really seem to be that we're fixing that. I mean, we sort of get lulls. We got lulls in the video space with DVD video, where everybody's worked the MPEG-2, and then of course AVC seemed to do it. But if we've got AV1, HEVC, AVC, and even some of the other codecs that are out there that are fairly innovative, it'll be interesting to see as we move resolutions whether there'll be a push for more AV1, HEVC. As a matter of fact, I can't say who I'm doing it for, but I'm helping Unisphere and Streaming Media do a survey around HEVC adoption versus AVC adoption versus AV1 and VP9, that survey will probably come out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So by the time we have our next event, that will probably be out and live. And some of these things that you guys are talking about are key to a few of the questions that are being asked there for the, for the rest of the industry. So that's quite interesting. So Kon, what you mentioned you didn't go, but there are things you'd worked on for that. What were sort of the trends that you expected to see going into IVC, having done work for other companies on that?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing this year was a lot of the push around deep learning and extracting, enriched metadata, if you will. So, some of the things that we've been working on or that I've been focusing on lately is solely around deep learning. So, extracting labels in real time, etc., or maybe feeding VOD clips through a system that can then start categorizing it into an asset management system by extracting, say, the context of a scene, the objects in the scene, and then say the PTS timestamp offsets where those objects are found. So that's been pretty interesting. I think the whole cloud thing makes it more interesting because it's not a problem to provision infrastructure, and you can just test these things very quickly, especially with GPUs and FPGAs. That's making that very interesting. But the one other conference I did go, and I don't know if any of you guys went to it, was SIGGRAPH, and there was a lot of interesting stuff there. Some of the papers, I think I went to one talk where they had a DIY, I wouldn't say the same thing as Lytro, but trying to do the multiple cameras from different angles, etc., and then basically combining those together. So the rig for that was a single Raspberry Pi and a bunch of code, and that generated a video file at the end of that. The real interesting part with that, though, and this is probably for something for people that are shooting for interesting things for it used to be digital cameras, handheld cams for say indie horror movies, etc. I think this was pretty interesting from the perspective of what they did is they sampled all of these images across time, so 600 shots with the Raspberry Pi moving across a gimbal, if you will, and then combined that using GPU shaders. So you sort of had this movement around the scene. But the interesting part was that they captured 2 or 3 seconds of audio every time the camera moved. So some of these shots were shot outside, and the combination of the audio blending made for a really good, plot for a horror movie. That was like the one thing that I found from SIGGRAPH that was really interesting.
So when you talk about it across the gimbal, are you talking about something like bullet time where it was 360, or are you talking about more like a linear across a rig that people would use to shoot things that would allow for what would look like a pan across?
Yeah, so it's basically a matrix, right? And then they have a wire with a servo that controls moving the camera back and forth and then up and down. And they take about 600 shots across that, zone, if you will. And after those are taken, then obviously because of the Raspberry Pi on this hanging on this cable could could swing in the wind or change tilt, azimuth, pan, etc. They run that through a filter to correct the orientation and the tilt, etc. So at the end of the day, you have 600 shots that sort of are pointing at the same location with this audio over time. Very interesting from that perspective.
That is very intriguing. It's almost like going back to the QuickTime VR or iPix, except doing it with many more shots. Yeah. All right, we're going to roll over into a couple topics that we have in our Flipboard, and one of the topics that came up, 2 topics that sort of tie together. Nintendo announced a ban on YouTube streaming, and now all of a sudden we've got the Disney Netflix sort of balkanization. And I think, Dom, you're going to run just a quick show here, so I'll be quiet so you can pop that one up.
While he's doing that, if you're interested, we do have a Flipboard link on the SM Advanced Forum website that you can click on to look at some of the topics that we're considering, for each month's show. So if you're interested in finding out what we're going to talk about, or perhaps want to suggest that we focus on something, that's a really good place to do it.
Yeah, and I'll add to Eric's point, the Flipboard is there essentially as a whole list of things we could talk about. Clearly, we've got an hour, so we can't talk about every single one. But if you see things that surface on that Flipboard before a show, let us know at the top of the show in the comment section, or even let us know, prior to the show.
And I hasten to add, there's already already a codec argument going off, not an argument, but there's definitely debate starting about codecs in the chat room on the main page. So I have a funny feeling we're going to be going back to roots at some point on the old SM Advanced Forum. Personally, I think Windows Media had it, but there we go. But anyway, no, this story, I found this story about.
Very briefly, yeah, because I think it's important.
Say again.
I said lead us through that story quickly, because I think it's important in terms of the industry. Do we self-police ourselves for types of content? And essentially what Nintendo is saying is we don't feel like there's a filter.
Well, I think this is an interesting story. I mean, I'm not sure if it's just a complaint that they're not seeing any of the revenue that obviously some of the game streamers are seeing, really, at the heart of it. I mean, my boy fell in love with Mario, got me to go out and buy a Wii so that I'd buy Mario. So I gave revenue to Nintendo because he spent a couple of months watching Mario YouTube streams. So it's interesting because had this ban come in, and that was over the sort of last 12-month period, had this ban come in, preventing people streaming Nintendo games on YouTube 12 months ago, I wouldn't have bought a Wii, I wouldn't have bought a Nintendo game. So that would have directly hit their customer base. So from my point of view, I think that they're sort of biting the hands that feeds them with this one. I think they're probably in the mode of sour grapes. Oh, look, someone else is making money leveraging our brand. But at the end of the day, are they, or are they actually giving you a lot of free advertising and putting a lot of energy into promoting your products? So I think there's two sides to that story, and I think it's I don't know what you guys think, but
Mark, a question for you. I know you do a lot of production. Have you done esports production?
We do a lot of esports production. Yeah, absolutely. Not so much with Nintendo. It's a very niche thing and a very specific thing that is very much guided by the Nintendo Corporation. So we don't work a whole lot with them. But to the YouTube thing, I think it's interesting, and I wonder if it's less of a priority for YouTube at this point, and for Google at this point, to have YouTube be completely ubiquitous. I don't know if you guys read the story about Google not allowing YouTube on the Amazon Echo Show. But it's an interesting. I can shoot you the link. I was trying to add it to the Flipboard, but that's the whole thing that I'll talk about with Don. But it's interesting because they've decided to not. It's the first time, to my knowledge, that they've decided to not allow YouTube content on a device. So I'm wondering if we're starting to see a pullback from the priority of making YouTube completely ubiquitous. Do you know what I mean?
Well, and part of that may be it's big player against big player. One of the things that came out today that I thought was interesting is Walmart's now announcing that you can order Walmart products on the Amazon Echo. And I didn't think I'd ever see that happen. But ultimately, Google and Amazon are in a war on a number of fronts, one of the fronts being video. So it may make sense that Google essentially says that. Let me ask though, Mark, on the esports thing, and you mentioned Nintendo's niche and it's controlled by the corporation. You've got other platforms like Xbox, which obviously have a lot of very popular games that are used for esports, as well as generic hardware, computers with integrated GPUs, separate GPUs, etc. What's your take on Nintendo as a corporation saying we want to control where our streams occur? Is that is that just part and parcel of the way that they've controlled their platforms before and kept them fairly closed? Or is that something that they feel like, to Dom's point, that they're losing revenue and they're going to come out with some sort of streaming solution that then only people with Wii's or NES's can use?
Yeah, I mean, it's classic Nintendo. I can't really speak to their corporate strategies, but I've been covering the video game industry. I was covering it as a journalist 20 years ago, and so I have a little bit of insight into how they've always done things, and this is very much the way they've always done things. In contrast to the Xbox platform, the PS4 platform, which allows you to, with their built-in overlay, to live stream to YouTube, to Twitch, to your own private, RTMP destinations, etc. You just can't do that on any Nintendo product, and it's, 'twas ever thus. The fact that they're specifically not allowing YouTube now is just, kind of par for the course, if you will.
Okay, that's interesting to know, because I mean, obviously, one of the appeals of the Wii when it came out was sort of the simplicity of it. But if the simplicity means that they either lose revenue, like Dom saying, I wouldn't buy it if I knew that I couldn't stream it, what have you. That's really intriguing. Dom, the next one was.
If I can add one more little thing. That said, most streamers, most people who cast themselves playing games are doing so with a downstream device anyway.
Right.
I don't know if it's most. A lot of gamers, especially on PC, are doing it with a downstream device. With Xbox and PS4, you have a built-in system that you can use. I think anyone who's wanting to cast themselves playing a Nintendo title is going to do so.
Work it out.
The many readily available devices or software solutions out there. So
yeah,
I don't think.
That's interesting, Mark, and yet what we're saying is essentially Nintendo's making it harder for somebody to do it because they have to use a downstream device as opposed to using something that's integrated into the PlayStations or Xbox.
Right.
Get it here.
Yep, exactly.
All right, Dom, so you're showing off hardware that we can use to downstream. I got that. So balkanization.
Make sure to buy the UVC compliant ones. Don't waste your money on anything else. They're cheaper as well. Anyway.
What's UVC mean?
USB video.
USB.
I can't remember what the C stands for. Anyway, there you go. These UVC ones work driverlessly with anything.
Going from exclusivity in streaming on the Nintendo to exclusivity of Disney content, let's talk a little bit about that. Eric, Con, I'd like to sort of get your takes on this. Is Disney's push, and Disney has pushed for content issues both with the Amazon video platform as well as the Netflix platform. Are we at the point where we're going to start seeing significant balkanization, either because large content owners want to do their own platforms or because they just don't feel like they're getting the best deal in terms of rights?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to think about is that, I mean, Disney is one of the few content owners that has a name that means something to consumers. So, they can sort of afford to say, we're going to put all the Disney content in our own service. And, people, primarily people with kids, but also if you're a fan of the Marvel Universe and Star Wars, you're going to know that Disney is where you're going to get your stuff. So I think it makes some sense for a company like Disney. Although you'll also recall that if you purchase a Disney film on a TVOD service, so if you download it from iTunes or buy it on Amazon, you can enroll it in Disney Movies Anywhere and watch it in a whole bunch of different services. So Disney's in kind of a unique position there. Will we see it more from other content owners? It's sure looking that way. I question, for the reasons I just mentioned, how successful they're going to be. But Brian Sullivan from Fox at IBC, predicted that we're going to see sort of, I think he called it the great rebundling or the great reaggregation, where, over time, I think, and I think we're all seeing this, where customers are getting a little tired of saying, well, I've got to go to Netflix to watch this, I've got to go to Hulu to watch that, I've got to go to Amazon Prime to watch this, et cetera, et cetera. Are we going to see the kind of a rebundling? Who knows what it's going to look like, but so that there is a single place, or a single place you can access through a number of portals, perhaps Amazon, perhaps Google, and access all the content you want.
And what will the price be for that? Because I mean, obviously, one of the big arguments for cord cutting is saving dollars, saving euros. But we all know, as we talked about in the audio world, that to listen to everything, you have to subscribe to multiple audio services, multiple music services. Therefore, the price pretty much goes back up to where it was. So, did he talk about whether the rebundling or reaggregation would be a convenience thing or a price saver, or both?
From the Fox perspective, it sounded like he was predicting or saying it was for both reasons, and also because the new skinny bundles that we're seeing, DirecTV Now, Sling TV, Hulu's live service, that they couldn't support the licensing. They couldn't continue to pay for the content. So it's a rights issue, it's an access issue, and it's a price issue.
Interesting. Kon, do you have a take on kind of the balkanization issue?
Yeah, I mean, I always defer to my wife on this one. Why do I need 20 apps? But I think I guess the one interesting thing that I've seen over the last couple of years is just the commoditization, if you will, of being able to deploy fairly complex streaming infrastructure via, say, a reference architecture script. So I know, a lot of smaller startups and even medium, larger size business units, etc. They've, done a proof of concept based on, we're going to deploy this for an hour. We know that if we do it in the cloud, we can tear it down after an hour or two, and evaluate if the platform, would be something that we can build or add on to, etc. So I think from that perspective, just the sheer simplicity of deploying something fairly complex, and that goes from the stream ingest, the live transcode, the live to VOD, even to things like cloud DVR. That's becoming more easy. Authentication for mobile, that's becoming more easy as well. There are lots of default, SDKs, toolkits, etc. I wonder if it'll go the route of a la carte API endpoints, right? And then someone building a UI on top of that. But I agree, things like pricing, rights management, etc. Those are the big, impeding factors, if you will.
Okay, good. So actually, in talking about these things, there were two other topics on the Flipboard that sort of caught my eye along the way. One is Kodi, and obviously what we've seen is not only is there the content that's premium, commanding a premium price, we've also had sort of very specific rights management around where you can watch that content. And to the point that Eric was making on the rebundling, and reaggregation, the question here becomes, why is Kodi being sued on multiple fronts and taken to court for what's being called copyright theft, etc.? There seems to be sort of a similar case that all of us remember from years ago with Napster, where essentially Napster was really good at doing delivery of MP3 content, and the studios at that point, the record labels at that point, really went hard against Napster. Kodi seems to be really good from a alternative set-top box interface, as well as delivery capability and aggregation, and as a result, it appears that the movie studios, even the European Union and others, are kind of coming up hard against Kodi. Just kind of a general question for those of you, or for all of our panelists here. Is this Napster-like, and if so, why or why not? Because it really seems to me that Kodi has been allowed to exist for the last 3 years, get really quite decent as an open source alternative, and now suddenly it's been so successful that it seems like the studios and copyright groups and even governments are trying to sort of take them down.
I think it's a matter of Kodi being the 800-pound gorilla now. There are a number of similar platforms, but Kodi has reached a level of market share, or I guess it's open source, so mind share, where they've made it a simple matter to pull down pirated content and watch it, easily. When my mom can do that, then it's a problem for content owners. When it's a bunch of teenagers in a basement who can figure out how to install a BitTorrent client and find the content they're looking for and pull it down and figure out how to view it and that sort of thing, then it's not so much of an issue. But I think if you make it easy enough, then you're a target for litigation for sure.
So for you, you think it's because of the fact that the general consumer can now use it to find content?
Absolutely. I mean, Kodi's a pretty mature platform. Like, you've been able to use it for years to do that. It's just that everyone's now discovered it, and Kodi is, I think if you asked most people who are even somewhat savvy, technologically savvy, they would know what Kodi was, or at least they would have heard of it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is Plex had been fairly popular, but then the price, obviously they were beginning to charge for certain things, and it seemed like people then started looking again for a free alternative, and Kodi came into play. So
exactly, and I think it becomes more of an issue to get back to the balkanization discussion that we were having. I think it becomes more of an issue as, like, let's take a look at what happened with the new Star Trek series and CBS's new exclusive platform. So if you want to watch Star Trek, you now have to, there is no other option, have to pay for CBS's service. And so it's quickly become the second most pirated series next to Game of Thrones. And that's because anyone can pirate it now. Anyone can, pull it down if they're, look, I'm not going to pay $6 or $10 for CBS All Access. I'm just going to go use Kodi, or I'm going to use that thing that my son told me about to go get that series. Do you know what I mean?
Well, and I'll even argue beyond that, Mark. I think one of the other issues there is if you have to use All Access and you're in a country where it's not easily accessible, no pun intended, or you can't sign up for it, because there are certainly countries where you can't sign up for All Access, then what is your alternative? Your alternative.
Then, in most countries, the alternative is Netflix.
True.
That content on Netflix outside the U.S. So then it's not so much of an issue. It's when we start talking about, like, Disney. To your point, Disney is in a unique position to leverage an exclusive platform like that, and they're not going to really affect what becomes, let's say, long tail content. I think if we start, having the FXs and the CBSs of the world all having their own individual exclusive platforms, then everything becomes long tail. Then everyone is watching, well, I'm paying for this, and this platform because those are my shows and those are what I watch. And then you never really kind of branch out and discover other content. You're just paying for your stuff and watching your stuff. And I think that's going to have a chilling effect on the content creation part of our industry, for sure.
I would agree. Dom, Con, Eric?
Yeah, I think Kodi is almost like a victim of its own flexibility. I think maybe like 2005 or 2006, I did some work on the Xbox Media Center pre-Kodi, XBMC, to basically enable people to shell out and play Power DVD with their DRM encrypted DVDs, right? So, or Blu-ray, etc. So there was this whole group of developers that were strongly against the platform being abused for piracy or anything like this, but they enabled flexibility for the platform through plugins with Python, right? So I think you had this, people started to figure it out, and it also became, say, more easily deployable on other devices. You could buy a cheap device with Kodi preloaded on it, and the only the only barrier to entry is knowing where that repo is to punch in, and then you have access to all of these scripts that people have created. So I think almost that whole piracy community, if you will, has started to take over the larger effort. That's what it seems to me, just from that point of view of the developer tools available to it.
It's interesting that you mentioned XPMC, because obviously, like you say, we've had these things around for more than a decade, but it's the ease of the general consumer saying, I can buy a Kodi-enabled device and be able to, almost like a Roku or an Apple TV, suddenly have access to all this content very easily.
I think I think you touch on an interesting point mentioning Roku there, because I think there's probably market forces which have suddenly kind of looked across the board and gone, hang on, Roku is a nice proprietary, tame, cheap set-top box model that's enabling cord cutters to cut the cord and stream. And they've IPO'd, and they've shown that there's value in that part of the market. Since there's value in that part of the market, if we've invested in Roku, or if we're investing in teams that play ball with regards to things like DRM, then let's make sure we start getting the regulation hard in on anything that's outside of that scope. And I think it's kind of like the RIAA jumping on Scour.net in 98, 97, whenever it was that Scour got taken down. I don't think there's any. Scour was always the sort of first of these in my mind, and I think Kodi is just a box which does what Scour.net did on the web.
We also have the example of Replay, which came out around the same time as TiVo, and of course one of their mistakes was you could cast content from, or share content from one of their boxes to another one of their boxes, and that was clearly the feeling was that then content suddenly wasn't being licensed for the number of devices or views that were being played.
It's complicated. I find it almost puts me off when I see the EFF all over things, and the EFF suddenly jumping into Kodi's cause. And it's kind of like every morning Cory Doctorow sort of sits there and does a Google search to see where DRM's appearing in any dialogue, and jumps in, sticks his boots in, and he's kind of like the anti-Nigel Farage. I get where he's coming from, but he doesn't come from the same place as me, for sure. It's security for the sake of security. It's protection of privacy for the sake of it. And I think, tearing the AFF away from W3C, and then appearing 2 days later just flapping his arms because Kodi's been torn down because some arguably people who've got copyright are arguing that they'd like their copyright defended. At the end of the day, if Cory could come up with an alternative business model, I think it might help the creative industries who create the content that we're all trying to DRM.
And I just did a quick search for Little Brother, and it turns out there are a lot of places you can download his novel for free. But it's probably not what he necessarily wants, because Amazon...
Should we share the links in the chat room?
No thank you. Amazon is the second or third link down beneath ones that say download Little Brother for free. So yeah. Cory, you're right. Cory comes from a different place than us from that standpoint. But let's talk about EFF and DRM, because that's the other piece that popped up is, and if I understand, Dom, EFF has actually stepped out of the W3C.
Yes, it sounds like a lover's tiff to me. I'm just trying to find it on the flipboard. Excuse me, not looking at the camera for a second. But it sounds like a lover's tiff to me. Basically, the EFF has left the W3C consortium over the issue of how DRM is supported in the browser. And at the moment, and it's not actually a technical issue, it's kind of funny. It's about whether the browsers might take pen testers and security testers to court if they break the DRM or not. And effectively, because the W3C, let me just find the story, because the W3C is saying, well, yeah, if they break the DRM, we'll take them to court, and that's how we're protecting the interests of copyright holders. That's why.
What's fascinating is, we've got Google extensions. Obviously, we've got EME on the window or on the Microsoft side, which that extension community has not grown very well. But that is a very valid point. That what happens if DRM is baked into the browser and there's circumvention of it?
That's right. Exactly that. It's, you know, historically, you know, if you sit down and try to crack Windows Media, then Microsoft will come, Windows Media DRM, then Microsoft will try to defend their technology, and to that extent, at least step into the liabilities issue of for the loss of revenue on it. Here we go. Here's the story. And the problem is when it goes over to the browsers, the browsers in adopting at least baked in DRM, which is the theory, and saying that they'll stand by the licensing agreements, which say, you know, you're allowed to use this, but as long as you don't hack it. And if you do, basically, they're saying that if the EFF is arguing that they want security consultants to be able to pen test it and hack it, and the browsers are not saying that they won't. It's a sort of double negative scenario. They're not saying that they won't prosecute the pen testers and security consultants who might do that. And so the EFF, who largely is probably made up with white hat hackers, who has basically said, well, you know, you can't do this. You're locking us out. You're putting us at risk of criminal charges if we try to break your DRM.
So I want to ask Mark and Kon a question around this, because I think this is interesting. And Mark, in the past, I guess a couple webcasts back, he actually said, you know, that they tend to focus still on more plugin architectures for video content like that, sort of Flash-based, etc. So here's the question for Eric and for Kon and Mark. Is DRM in the browser something that's beneficial to the content owners, especially the content owners you work with in live production like that? Or is it something that actually may be a barrier to easy authentication for, you know, for viewers who want to watch live content, say from an event or a concert?
Well, if I can take it first, it's both. You know, we've got a select number of customers who have some sort of pay-per-view or subscription model, and they marry that with a DRM solution to protect the content. But their user base, their viewer base, are pretty well educated, and they're able to, you know, overcome the hurdles of implementing, you know, DRM from the player side. But yeah, I mean, I think from a widespread perspective, we just don't see DRM being adopted. It's just not, it's not a necessary evil yet for most of our customers, even who are you know, publishing lots of exclusive, high-profile live content. They protect it with token auth or, you know, some sort of proprietary access control, but very little DRM implementation whatsoever.
Okay, so it's enough to have a gatekeeper rather than having DRM throughout the whole chain.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kon, your take?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You know, there are a lot of services now that are making it more easy to do the mobile authentication, etc. Like be that OAuth, or AWS has Cognito, etc. You know, so you have some type of role-based access to authenticate. But as far as the content goes, for vast majority for live is, you know, key rotated HTTP delivery over HTTPS, right? And various permutations of that. You know, I've seen some that are UDP based, but you know, even the UDP based protocols are wrapping those with rotating keys. That's almost more similar to that traditional broadcast CA model. But it is a lot of, and in some cases it's, you know, when you talk to people that are looking to build this and they're not experienced in that specific area, you know, there's often confusion about, do you really need to protect the content or the pipe? Which of the two is it? You know, and are you ready for all of the other things that you need to do? You know, even from like the upstream server side, you know, if you're able to scale your streams through the CDN, does that mean that your key servers are set up to scale? You know, are you managing those same key servers, or is an external entity managing them. So there are a lot of challenges there, and I think also because of that, a lot of providers will look at the value of the content and go with the lowest common denominator that doesn't incur a massive charge, or sort of up the cost of delivering the content. But having said that, right, for the premium content, for VOD, etc., that's a completely other kettle of fish, if you will.
Okay, well that's interesting. And the rotating key thing, Dom, I think you wrote an interesting article a few years ago about failure points within sort of live event, and we've seen even recently with some of the big fights that come out of Vegas, just how much that authentication at that point of access for controlled access has actually been really problematic. People not being able to establish streams because they can't establish the authentication.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think it's one of those weak links that gets overlooked. We spoke about them a couple of weeks ago. Mark and I were talking about them on one of the pilot episodes. There is actually surprisingly few organizations which are set up just to offer a paywall service and focus on that and do it well. There's more broadly who offer DRM cert management, but actually somebody who'll deal with the user profiling, taking the payment as well. They're few and far between, and it's definitely not a. I don't know whether that's because of demand or whether that's just because it's not a mature market, or whether conditional access token auth is just does the job fine for something that's ephemeral and is only there for a couple of hours. How quickly can hackers share keys? Probably quite quickly in small communities, but to share it widely, it gets a bit more difficult.
Yeah, and to Mark's point with token authentication, and actually I'm thinking here just on the side, we may need a glossary because we reference things in shorthand that the audience may not.
No, we don't want those audience members. Just lose them. This is what we're all about here. If you can't keep up, then get Googling.
Yeah. I was going to say, Tokoth is not being allowed to smoke a toke. It's
You're in the room full of plants, man. Get off that yoga mat.
No lotus position for me today. But speaking of that, since the West Coast is well represented here and we have a show coming up, Eric, tell us Stream Media West and the Live Streaming Summit. What are the dates for that?
Yeah, Streaming Media West and the Live Streaming Summit, which is a satellite event with Streaming Media West, are on November 2nd and 3rd at the Hyatt Regency in Huntington Beach. Dan Rayburn, as usual, has programmed a 3 or 4 track Streaming Media West event. At the same time is the Live Streaming Summit, which I program, and as the name would suggest, it focuses exclusively on live streaming. Tim, you're going to be moderating. It occurs to me as we're sitting here, Mark, I need to ask you if you want to come, so I'll do that later. But it's a great event, great venue, and I believe early bird registration is still open if people are interested, and if not, there may be a way I can get you some discount codes.
And this year, if I remember correctly, Eric, it's not going to be the traditional, whatever it was, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's toward the weekend. Yeah,
the pre-conference workshops, which are half-day workshops put on by people like Jan Ozer and Robert Reinhardt, will be on Wednesday the 31st. So they'll be on Wednesday the 1st. Sorry, they'll be on Wednesday, November 1st, and the main event will be November 2nd and 3rd, which is a Thursday and Friday.
All right, very good.
Can I just jump in there? That means that the next SMAF will actually be there. So we need to work that one out.
That's definitely true. Dom, are you coming over for that one?
I am coming over.
All right, so we've got Eric that'll be there. I'll be there. Dom, obviously, if Mark and Kon come, and we'll probably get another guest or two. I think that'll be fun. That'll actually be a nice live one, because the last live one we did from IBC, we still were all in separate locations as opposed to just in the one home location.
Only thing is, I have a funny feeling it'll be right in the middle of the keynotes, so maybe we'll just have to stream the keynotes. We'll have to talk to Eric offline about that.
My plan entirely. I was going to say we should do it from the hot tub at the Hyatt, all 5 of us in a hot tub.
The grotto. They call it the grotto. That's what it would be.
I don't know. You want to share bathwater with me?
There you go, folks. You've wasted another hour with us in this first official streaming media, or sorry, SM Advanced Forum. We really, really appreciate all the work Dom's done in getting the platform up and running for us. And Dom, I'm going to let you close out.
I'm not sure what I've got to say really, apart from I'll see you at Streaming Media West, and probably don't forget to check out the magazine. It's gradually accruing articles that we're all aggregating. I think the principle will be once we've had a guest on, we'll add them to the contributors list so that just keeps growing and getting more interesting. So do check that out. You should be able to see it on stream now. And of course, join us all back here in a month's time, and tell your friends. Let's keep it informal. If you want to get on as a guest, let us know. I think we can accommodate. I think we can accommodate a guest each. I think if we get larger than about 8 in the chat room, there just won't be enough time, or we'll end up being convinced to make it a 2-hour session, which will probably make my wife cry because I have to go and put my kids to bed. Cool. I feel like I should play some incidental music to finish, but I can't do that through this setup. However, if you do want to hear some more music, I'll be back online on the Thursday night show at 11 o'clock UK time. Right. See you later, guys. See you later, Tim.
Cheers.
See you later. See you later, Mark. See you later, Con. Thanks for coming on. See you soon, Eric. Have fun, guys.